Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. So last night I saw a movie. I rented a movie yesterday from my favorite shop to rent movies. The only place that you can go to rent movies. I rented this brand new movie that came out actually this year, Civil War, which is which was written and directed by Alex Garland. I'm a huge Alex Garland fan. Ex Machina, Annihilation are just like masterpieces as far as I'm concerned. Science fiction horror based films in the more modern times. They're just amazing. Alex Garland is also really prolific. He's a writer. He wrote the screenplay for a really cool sci-fi movie called Sunshine that came out a few years ago. He also did Dread, which is a big film, big screen adaptation of Judge Dredd, which is super badass. He wrote the screenplay for that. He's also a writer. He's written quite a few books in science fiction, in the science fiction realm. And his last movie that he had done that I had seen is a movie called Men, which I only saw once. I really liked it, but I don't know. I haven't been drawn to see it again for some reason. I just thought it's a very good movie. I liked it, and it's kind of insane the ending, but I just haven't really. I don't know. I just haven't been. In all honesty, I wasn't as excited. I do have to see it again. His movies are very dense. They're very intense. He's a very intense writer. His films definitely tackle kind of like issues that we face as a society, but in a in very science fiction horror based you know through that kind of a lens. But and he, again, his films are very intense. They are um, he goes for the throat. I think Alex Garland. He's got this certain kind of intensity to his films. So I was really looking forward to Civil War. I almost saw it in the theater. It was put out by A24, which is pretty much all of his films have been put out by this company. A24, of course, is like has emerged as this, major film company that has like really nurtured and put out a lot of horror films that are, well, I think it's kind of silly to call it that, but a lot of the times A24, the movies that they put out are looked at as kind of like elevated horror. But I just feel like there are horror films that are a little bit outside of your traditional kind of Hollywood paint by numbers, you know, way of putting out a movie, or way of telling a story in the horror genre or science fiction genre. There's always their A24 always has a little bit of this, a little bit of an art house kind of feel to it. Um, a lot of those their films tend to be a little bit on the slower side. They have a European feel to me about them, but I like, not all of them are great, but I think they really um, try to do something different, try to do something unique. A lot of great filmmakers have come out of, or they A24 has really showcased a lot of really great filmmakers like Robert Eggers, um, and Ari Aster being one of the biggest, and Alex Garland, of course. But I watched Civil War last night, and it's, I don't know, I was kind of disappointed with it. It's not as good as, say, Ex Machina or Annihilation. The writing just, I don't know, I feel like it's got moments to it that are just incredible. There's this one sequence or scene in this film that I thought was just um, so incredible, and it reminded me of the first time that I watched Annihilation, or the first time I watched Ex Machina, where I was so absorbed with the richness of the dialogue, the kind of the edginess of the story, the the questions about morality, all of these really heavy uh, adult topics. But the writing in those, especially those two films, is just so incredible and just so gripping. Um, and in a lot of ways, both of those films are thrillers in a way. But there's one scene in this in Civil War where I was just blown away, and I was really hoping. I wish the rest of the movie had that quality, and it's with Jesse Plemons, who is a really amazing actor right now. The He was in Killers of the Flower Moon, and he's been in quite a few movies in the last couple of years. But he plays an FBI agent in Killers of the Flower Moon, and he's incredible in that movie. But he's a really great actor. He really is a chameleon, and there's a scene with him in it. And the cast is really good um, in this film, pretty solid. The star Kirsten Dunst is in this film. Kaylee Spaney and Wagner Mora, and Sonia Matora and Stephen McKinley. Of course, the big name or the big draw to this film is Kristen Stewart. Sorry, Kristen Dunst, and shows she's like the star of this film. But there's a scene with between the cast and Jesse Plemons, who plays this kind of paramilitary or this militia guy, and he has them at gunpoint, and the scene is just unbelievable. It's so intense, it's so brutal, but it's so riveting, and you really don't know how it's going to end, and it's just incredible. And for me, that scene is so powerful and so well done. And unfortunately, or fortunately, that scene is actually in the trailer for Civil War. They put out a few trailers for Civil War when it came out. It was in wide release in the theaters. This is the biggest budget. This movie has the biggest budget, I think, of to any A24 film. The film feels it's a little weird, but I think it's good in some ways. It feels like a low budget movie, but it also feels like a big Hollywood spectacle at the same time. It's kind of like in the middle. The scope of the film is pretty incredible, but there's a scene in this movie with Jesse Plemons that I just think is absolutely incredible, and I felt like the rest of the movie was it was okay as far as the characterization in it. That particular scene that I'm talking about is so riveting, and you really care about every character that's in that particular scene, and you're kind of scared as to what is going to happen. And I just felt that was the only moment in the film or moments in the film where I found myself really invested in the film, and I really cared about the characters. The rest of the movie is okay. It's like I never felt outside of that scene, and there are some other things in the movie that are pretty good outside of that particular scene, and it was sometimes that's the case with trailers is where trailers will have a couple of really riveting scenes in it, and sometimes when you actually see the movie is pretty disappointing, and that happens to be the only scene or sequence of scenes that is really great. And I have to say that is kind of what happened with this movie. Outside of that particular sequence, I found myself not really caring about who was on screen. I wasn't as invested. Very strange. It felt like everything else in the movie was, as far as the characters, and Alex Garland, first and foremost, not only being an amazing director, he's a brilliant writer, and so he's all about characterization, or at least he usually is. And I felt like this was kind of a misstep. I feel like there wasn't that draw. There wasn't that. There weren't those hooks to pull you in to really care about what was going on. And so it just it was interesting, and I cared about what was happening, but I wasn't pulled in like I was in that scene. Before and after that scene, it's kind of a little bit. It almost feels a little bit stale as far as the characterization, and as far as having empathy towards what you're seeing, and who you're seeing, and what's going to happen to those people. It was like it was okay. From a direction standpoint, this movie is pretty beautiful looking. It's pretty the direction Alex Garland, as far as the visual element, it looks pretty spectacular. Again, this is an A24 film, like all of his other movies, but this really feels like a really big, epic kind of film. But ultimately, I feel like I was kind of let down by this movie. There's one musical. The other thing that Alex Garland, I think, is kind of known for is like his cues, as far as with music, orchestral music or just music in general, and using the music to really build the scene. That is really effective. Most of his films have that kind of quality to them, and there's one scene in this film in particular where it's very violent and it's very brutal, but the music that they decided to pick is so fucking bad. I don't know how else to describe it. It was so terrible and so off-putting that it's a fairly long sequence of where they get into the brutality of what's happening and people are being executed, and it's very brutal. And there is this like kind of 90s hip hop tune that comes on that's kind of this upbeat tune that is a great tune, but it so does not fit what you're seeing with the imagery. And it like I remember when I was watching the movie and that scene came on with the song, I was just like, what the fuck? Like, you got to be kidding me. Like, who okayed that? Like, it ruined for me. It ruined the entire sequence because the scene and the imagery that you're getting, there's not really any dialogue. You're getting almost this montage of like horrific things. It's so intense, but then when the song comes on, it's like it totally took me out of the scene, and it was like, you got to be kidding me. I couldn't. I thought it was a joke, and I get maybe Alex Garland is trying to like fuck with people, like having this like weird and odd or this odd juxtaposition, but it was so bad, and I'm like, wow, how did this get a green light? And it just totally took me off. It took me out of the movie, and to be honest, it was so jarring that it was hard to get back into the movie after this happened because it's a fairly long sequence with this really horrible. The song itself is actually good, but it just does not fit what you're seeing visually or the aesthetics behind it. It's so bad and it's so off-putting, and it really took me on. It took me out of the film. Not only did it take me out of the scene of what I was seeing and the experience, but it kind of took me off the movie, out of the movie, where it's just like, what? Like, it was so disorienting, and not in a good way at all. Like, it was really weird and strange. And this sequence that I'm talking about that is actually really great came along, and I was into the movie. But then it kind of loses its steam, and I found myself not as captivated after that. After that sequence ends, so I don't know. I thought this movie could have been a lot better. I thought the writing could have been good, and of course, this movie is about a new civil war that emerges, and of course, it's very very much a contemporary story about what our country has been facing. It brings back all of the imagery that we have seen as far as the riots um, that started over George Floyd, the execution of him, and also the Capitol riots, ripped right from the headlines. And so it really is the theme and the what this film is about really does hit home and it makes the film pretty frightening because it's so real, and we are experiencing this, and we have lived through this somewhat. So in that regard, it is. But the thing that is weird about this film, and I get that it was probably something that Alex Garland really wanted to kind of set in stone, as far as the film not taking a stance politically, which I think is a good idea. But the film is basically about these states in the United States that break away, succeed from the United States, and there are these militias and these paramilitary groups that arise, and their goal is to basically kill the president and to invade the White House. And so it's kind of that's the centerpiece of the story. But there's never ever any kind of inkling or indication as to a perspective as to why it happened or why it's happening. And again, I feel like he could have done, and I on one hand I thought that's a cool way to approach it. Like, keep it apolitical but just show kind of the fallout of a society collapsing. Like, it's not about whether you're on this side of the fence or on this side of the or on the other side of the fence politically. It's about the experience of when the shit hits the fan, this is what's going to happen. This is probably how it's going to play out. On one hand, I feel like that makes sense, and that is an interesting way to kind of, and almost in some ways more frightening way to experience this film. But I also felt like taking that stance as a filmmaker, and what they decided to do, I almost feel that really hurts the film, because there's no, I don't know, I felt like there wasn't any idea or perspective as to why things had gotten that bad. There's no, like, I would have loved to have seen, especially further into the movie, because I was hoping there was going to be some kind of, opinion or perspective as to why this was happening. But across the board, there's zero perspective. There's no discussion as to why things have gotten this bad, or why this is happening. And I kind of felt like into the movie, it really hurt the film that there wasn't any kind of perspective or emotional reasoning, on either side as to why this was happening, or why things got so incredibly terrible that it would cause the country to lead itself down this path. And I felt ultimately, because there's zero perspective on that, or voicing of that, it hurt the film. It hurt the film, and I think that was a misstep, and it was a backfire, because there was no perspective. They could have done that easily, and remained apolitical, and still remain kind of neutral, but just give a different perspective, or any kind of perspective as to why you have these paramilitary groups that want to kill the president. Something as to what's their motivation. It was basically, you're in the cockpit, and all of these things are happening, and there's no, like, zero indication as to how things got this way. And I just felt that was, and I get it, he was probably saying, Alex Garland was like, well, you will make up your own opinion, but I think ultimately taking that stance hurts the film, because there's none of that. So yeah, I don't know, it's I don't know, it's not really, I'm glad I didn't see it in the theater, unfortunately, or fortunately, but I don't know if this movie's even really, really worth watching. I was really looking forward to seeing this movie, and it's kind of disappointing, but yeah. So, yeah. But if you haven't seen Ex Machina or Annihilation, those movies are masterpieces. So, yeah. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time. Peace.